Number 1. I'll be there in a minute. Okay, I'm gonna have to explain some things before I start the story. It'll be necessary for you to fully understand what happened. I will try to keep that short, but I will also change the names in the area that it happened in, to keep what happened private. It's just respectful to do that. I'm a healthcare worker. What I do is I go to the homes of senior citizens who aren't able to function completely on their own. Most of the people I've worked for have been blind or unable to move on their own. So I keep the house clean, and I do other chores, plus I make sure that they are all taken care of. Also, the area that I live in is extremely rural, so I tend to be working with older people who live out in the country. This was the strangest assignment that I had ever been on, and I will explain why. The senior I was taking care of lived in a hollow. There was an actual house sitting on her property, but the house was very old and dilapidated. But the property was pretty big, so she put a trailer in the front yard, and she lived in that trailer. The hollow was somewhat isolated, and I had to drive down a dirt road to get to it. There were not any street lights or anything like that. So when it got dark there, it really got dark there. The lady was in her 80s, and her husband had died a few years before. So she lived in the house alone for years. However, her eyesight began failing her, and she had trouble doing much around the house. She had several children, but none of them could really be there for her all the time. Although her one son, Mike, had gone there to try and take care of her. For a while, he lived in the abandoned house, but that was not very ideal. So he bought one of those really small, egg-shaped trailers. I have absolutely no idea what to call them, but it was set in front of the old house, and that is where he stayed. The old house always scared me. It was so dark and empty. I always used to wonder if someone or something was in there. But that is just me. I can get scared of the stupidest things. Mike took care of his mom, but he wasn't a responsible guy. He drank a lot, and he used a lot of drugs. He would be wasted much of the time, and he wasn't that much of a help to his mother after a while. So the other siblings, who couldn't take care of her because they had families and were employed, decided to hire her a healthcare worker. And that is where I come into the story. First, I want to mention that I really love the old woman, who I will call Mary. Yeah, I have a thing for M names, it seems. But she was a kindly old woman who just needed some help. Other than her eyesight, she was fine. Her mental state was great. She had no big physical issues. So mostly my job was to clean the house, make her meals and things like that. And she was always very grateful and kind. Mike, on the other hand, was not someone I cared for much. He was one of those true country boy types. He was a big, barroom brawling type of guy. He listened to Hank Williams Jr. and that kind of music. Well, except when he was drunk. Then for some reason, he switched from that sort of stuff to bluegrass. And plus, he listened to this bluegrass that had these strange jokes in between the songs, where a guy says, "Hello there, stranger," and the other guy replied, "Well, hello there, stranger," and a short joke followed. But the worst thing about Mike was that he drank himself silly, and he was hard to deal with when he was like that. Furthermore, it could create a problem with his mother, Mary. I was not supposed to work in an environment where there were drugs and alcohol, so technically I should have left the job. But I didn't want to do that to the old lady, so I convinced myself that as long as he kept the drugs and alcohol in his little trailer, that was fine. He did often eat dinner with his mother, and he wasn't allowed to bring beer in there while I was there. So this is exactly what happened. And I'm sorry if the background was too long, but it really does explain what happened. It was dark and I had prepared dinner. Mary wanted Mike to eat with her that evening, so 15 minutes before the meal was done, she asked me if I could go over and tell him that dinner would be ready. I went out. I walked over to the little trailer and I knocked on the door. There was no answer, so I called out, "Hey Mike, dinner will be ready in 15 minutes, and your mom wants you to come over." "I'll be there in a minute," came a muffled voice. Yeah, he was absolutely drunk. I walked back to the house and decided to finish up making the meal. During the entire time that I was making the meal, Mike did not come over to the bigger trailer. So before I set the table, I went out to the little trailer again. I assumed that Mike had passed out or something. "Mike, your mom wants you to come over for dinner," I called out. "It's ready now." "I'll be over in a minute," he replied, still sounding weird and likely wasted. I went back over to the house and set the table up. I gave Mary her meal, and she asked what was going on with Mike. I had to tell her that I went over there twice and asked him, and he kept telling me he would be over in a minute. It was around that moment that I heard what sounded like the door to the little trailer open and then close. Mary heard it too, so we both assumed that Mike was finally coming over to have dinner. So I began to make him up a plate. But Mike didn't come over. He didn't come over while I was making the plate. He didn't come over in the minutes following. He didn't come over while Mary began eating her meal. And it was weird because I heard him leave the little trailer. Mary, I'm going to go check on Mike," I told her. "He told me he was coming over twice, but I have no idea what's going on." I went out the door into the dark country night. There was a little bit of light coming from the porch of the big trailer. The little trailer, though, was completely dark. I have to admit, I was a bit afraid as I was walking over to the little trailer. It wasn't just because it was dark, but also because it was such a weird situation. And I was worried that maybe Mike had gotten really drunk and hurt himself somehow. If he had to go to the hospital, my employer would find out he was drinking, and then I would be taken out of the household. I walked up to the little trailer, and I knocked on the door. There was no answer this time. "Mike, are you coming over for dinner?" I called out. I waited, expecting to hear him tell me that he would be there in a minute, but no response came from him. I knocked again. Nothing. I began wondering if he had stumbled out into the hollow or something. I first, though, decided to check the trailer. The door was unlocked, and I entered the trailer for the first time in my life. And God, it was filthy. It was covered in beer cans, whiskey bottles, dirty clothes, and it smelled like crap. I couldn't understand how anyone could live in a place like that. I searched for the light switch and turned it on. What I saw scared me more than I'd ever been scared in my life. Mike was lying on the floor of the little trailer in a huge puddle of blood. His chest had been ripped open, and his eyes showed that he was dead. Someone had murdered him. Terrified, I ran out of the other trailer towards the big trailer. I shot my eyes around, expecting to see someone come out of nowhere and try to kill me. I made it to the big trailer safely, and I was relieved that Mary was there unharmed. I went and called the police. Now, this is the scariest part of what happened. When the police arrived, I told them everything that had happened. The paramedics told them that Mike had likely been dead for a while. This was confirmed by the coroner. Mike had been dead for hours before I'd found him. And that is when I realized two things. Whoever I kept hearing telling me that they would be there in the house in a minute, it was likely the killer, since it could not have been Mike. And whomever I heard open then close that door, it was likely the killer too. We didn't know who killed Mike. He was involved with a lot of drug dealers and less than noble people. Whoever did it had slunk off into the hollow and was never found out to my knowledge. I remained Mary's healthcare worker for the next 2 years. Then she passed away. I almost quit because I was scared the murderer would return. But I also liked Mary enough that I wanted to do whatever I could to help her. Number 2. Gravel. I'm sorry if the story sounds sort of typical. I guess in a way that it does. But it was pretty scary too. This happened on a night when I was hanging out at a friend of mine's house. We both lived in the country, maybe a couple miles away from each other, down a gravel road. We had lived there all of our lives, and we had grown up as friends. During the summer, I was staying there playing video games. Normally, if I stayed too late, I would just spend the night over there. But for some reason this night, I did not feel like sleeping over there. I was really wanting to be in my own bed for some reason. It was about 1 in the morning when I decided to go and walk back to my house. The walk was something I had made thousands of times. As I mentioned, we had been friends for a long time, and we hung out all the time. It was of course very dark outside as I was walking over to my place. The moon was out that night, but it was not full. Still, it provided a bit of light for me to be able to see with. As I was walking, I thought I heard another set of footfalls taking place on the gravel road. I listened to it for a few moments before I stopped walking. There was no sound when I stopped walking, so I looked around and didn't see anything. I began walking again, and it wasn't long before I once again heard what sounded like someone walking on the gravel road. If you've ever walked on a gravel road before, you would understand what I'm talking about. It is a very distinguishable sound. I once again stopped, and the sound stopped again. I was a little scared at that point, but I also realized that I had been a little scared even before I thought I heard a sound at all. I mean, I was walking down a dark country road in the middle of the night. I should be a little scared. I began walking again, and after a few moments, the sound behind me began back up. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was all in my head, but I couldn't convince myself of that. So this time I stopped, and when I did, the sound continued. So I knew that it was not my imagination, and I was hearing someone else walking on the road. It wouldn't really matter if someone was just out walking, but whoever it was had stopped twice when I had stopped, so they deliberately were trying to get me to not be able to discover that they were out there. I turned around, and that's when I saw him. There was a guy standing a bit back away from me on the road. I couldn't make out much about him because it was so dark, but it seemed like he was standing there and looking at me, and then he began to move. And I can only explain his movements like this. If you've ever seen the original A Nightmare on Elm Street, at the beginning when Freddy's chasing Tina, he crouches down a bit and spreads his arms out, running at her while flailing his arms. And that is what this person did, and they were running at me. And so I turned and I took off down the road, and I ran as fast as I could. I thought I heard him running after me on the gravel, but I didn't look back to see what he was doing. I always thought if you took time to look back at someone who was chasing you, you increased your chances of getting caught. It wasn't until I got home that I took the chance to see how close the guy was behind me, but when I looked back he was gone. I didn't bother to try to find out what happened to him. I just got into my house, and I locked all the doors and windows. When I think back on this story, I often think it was just someone fucking with me. If someone really wanted to hurt me, why would he not have continued to chase me? So maybe it was just some older teenager getting his jollies. I don't know. But if you could have seen that guy running after me like that, you would have run away too because it was terrifying. Number 3. Flashes. You always hear about how people in the country don't lock their doors. Well, I have to say that's bullshit. But I do have to admit that when we're home, we often leave our windows open, even while sleeping. I mean, my dad doesn't much care for paying for air conditioning, so unless it's deathly hot outside, that's the only way we're going to get any relief from the heat. Assuming there's a breeze anyway. But yeah, we still get some fresh air out here, and I don't really need to worry like people in the city do. So it's not at all surprising that at the end of last summer, I was in my room on my laptop watching, videos with the window open. We're kind of far from town. We're too far to get delivery from all those great delivery food apps. I'm always seeing people talk about them, but we're close enough that it only takes 10 minutes or so to run in and grab a burger if we really want one. So we're kind of rural. Anyway, I was in my room not too long after my parents went to sleep. I just figured I'd find something to watch and was enjoying myself a bit, when I saw the strangest thing out of the corner of my eye. It was some weird flashing lights outside. I closed my laptop reflexively and pulled out my earbuds. I didn't hear anything. The street we live on is very secluded. Very few houses are around, and a lot of those lots are just wooded area. We have a large corner lot, bordered by woods on two sides. My bedroom is in the back corner of the house, so I have a window by my bed that looks out into the backyard and our back porch. Then I have a window that looks out on our side yard, and beyond that a road. Across the road is just more woods. I think there used to be a house there, but it was torn down a long time ago, and nature is taking over again. So I set my laptop down and got off the bed, going to the window that looked out on the street. I didn't see anything, just a single street light towards the front of my house, otherwise just darkness. I figured maybe I'd imagined it, or even that it had come from the website I was on. Those ads can get pretty crazy sometimes, and I was pretty invested in that video. I shrugged it off and went back to my bed. Slipping between the sheets, I popped in my earbuds and picked up my laptop, preparing to pick up where I left off. Once again, my room was filled with flashing lights. This time, though, I saw movement of them going down the road. I realized they were red and blue. Police lights, I wondered. There were no sirens. I slipped out of bed again, preparing to go to the side window, when I glanced towards the window by my bed. The lights were headed in that direction and were illuminating the back porch. In surprise, I slipped backward and fell on my ass. There was a face at my window. It was mere inches from where I'd been lying, watching my videos. It was a man, older than me, probably my dad's age, but I couldn't really tell. He had a shaved head and tattoos on his face. He was leering at me. I had no idea how long he'd been there. There had been nothing between us but a screen on my window, which I just realized was open. He didn't say anything. He just smiled at me. Half of his teeth were missing, like some meth head. I scrambled back to my feet and out of the bedroom door, screaming for my dad. My dad came out of the bedroom in his shorts with his shotgun in his hand, my mom calling, "Be careful," behind him. I slid to a stop in the hallway and gestured to my room. "Crazy guy outside my window," I managed to say, and without missing a beat, my dad went straight for the back door that led to the porch the man would be standing on. I followed him as he pulled it open and stepped outside. I looked out the door behind him as he stepped firmly into the back porch and held up the gun. There was no one there any longer. "Come near my house again and I'll blow your head off," my dad shouted into the night. There was no response. After a moment, I slipped out behind my dad and went over to the window. It had looked a little odd from the door. My dad followed me, and we both saw what had looked odd was the bit of screen that was hanging down and had obviously been cut with a knife. My dad suddenly ran back into the house, and it dawned on me that the man may have gone inside. I followed him as he searched the house, but there was no sign of him. As we searched, the police pulled into our driveway. The same flashing lights lit up the night as multiple cars pulled up along the road. My mother had called them as we tried to take care of the situation ourselves, but they had already been in the neighborhood. I stood on the porch with my father as we explained what had happened. I gave them a description of the guy, and we showed the officer the back window as others went to search the property. There was a burst of excitement from the woods across the street when a group of police officers exited the woods with a man in cuffs. The same man, the bald man with the tattooed face that I now saw was wearing a prison jumpsuit. The officer who had been asking me questions explained that the man had broken out of the local jail. He was suspected of raping and murdering a teenage boy. I thought back to hearing of some boy in my school having met some horrible fate lately. It was just one of those things you heard about, some kid you really didn't know. You didn't hear about that kind of thing around here often. It had to be the same guy, didn't it? Had he been watching the videos over my shoulder? Was he just looking for a place to hide? Or had he been after me? I was suddenly very happy I had still been wearing my shorts this whole time. We'd since replaced the screen, but I don't open that window anymore, and I move my bed up against a different wall. But even knowing he's back in jail, and even if the trial puts him in prison, I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to feel comfortable again. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.